this from Linux again, so we'll see how it works. Be two in a row, surprisingly. Close that. All right. Hey everybody, welcome to the Threecast. I'm your host, Matthew Weber. I'm joined by Mr. Vincent Hui.
Hello.
Ricky is not here. He might join us for a Threecast eventually.
He'll be well.
Him and his little kids. He apparently doesn't know how to go to sleep yet, so he's working on it. All right, so this is the Threecast. We review movies, comic books, every once in a while, TV show. Pretty much that's what we do. Every once in a while, we'll diverge from our topics and talk about technology, because we're nerds. But tonight we're going to review a movie. It was my selection this week, and we watched the Da Vinci Code, which is the first Dan Brown movie to come out. But it's the second, so it's really weird because Angels and Demons is actually a prequel to the Da Vinci Code, right, Vince?
Yeah, but did it actually come out before Da Vinci Code, though?
No, I don't think in either movie or book. I think it came out after both. And I'm
I think
the movie did.
Yeah, I'm thinking that Da Vinci Code might have come first, and like he did a later Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of thing where he tried to make a prequel or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's exactly what he did. Of course, calling it a prequel doesn't take anything away from how bad the second movie was. It was still just a terrible sequel. Really, with Dan Brown movies and books, it really doesn't matter what order any of his stuff is because there's no continuance between any of the novels, right? I mean, you can read them all separately and you really don't. You're not going to lose anything.
He does. Dan Brown, again, we're talking about the movie, but in the books, though, Dan Brown does put a paragraph or two usually saying, oh, and since Professor Langdon left X country, he broke ties with her, and now he's just alone again, right? Like, that's how he kind of starts the book, right?
Disposable female character, and then moved on.
Basically, the guy is a Prof. James Bond character, man. He is what profs aspire to be. Like, traveling around the world doing conferences, doing academic stuff that actually is on esoteric things that matter in some way to greater societal issues. Yeah, that's kind of important, man.
All right, so if you haven't seen the Da Vinci Code, it stars Tom Hanks and a bunch of European characters.
Well, I mean, it has...
the Gandalf guy. What's his name?
John Renaud, the professional.
Well, then Ian...
Oh, Gandalf, Ian McKellen.
Yeah, Ian McKellen. He's the villain in this movie.
Oh, spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, right? So, which is interesting. All right, so basically, this is National Treasure, but in France.
Yep.
And partially in London, right? Towards the end.
Yep.
Because they visit Westminster Abbey.
Well, the church that they inter Alexander Pope and Newton and all that stuff. Yeah.
Right. So mostly it takes place in France, and then they move to London. Anyways, so basically this is a treasure hunt where they're searching for the Holy Grail. And there's this whole, it's basically a historical novel come to the big screen. It was very, very popular in both book and movie form.
Yeah.
So I don't really feel like we need to give too much of a summary because I think pretty much everybody's seen this movie or read the book. What I want to talk about, let's start with this. Ignoring our opinions on the books, let's talk about Tom Hanks as Robert Langdon. Does he really... When I first saw this movie, I just didn't think he really fit this role. Now, maybe it's my bias against Tom Hanks, all things Tom Hanks, because I don't care for him as an actor.
Really?
I really don't. There's not a lot. I'll be honest, I haven't seen all of his movies, but the ones that I have seen him in, I just don't really care for him as an actor. But again, in this movie here, I just didn't feel like he fit the role. But I'm also not sure who would have done a better job. So after seeing the second movie, Angels and Demons, it actually kind of warmed me up a little bit more to him in the role. Maybe just because I got used to it. What do you think, Vince?
Yeah, well, I think that it's a kind of double-edged sword. I don't think Ron Howard needed to bring in Tom Hanks. I think that when you have such a big star or to anchor a movie, it usually is because the story isn't so clear or it's some new IP. But they had such a huge following when they made this movie that you could have got a pretty lesser known actor who maybe, as you said, would suit the part better than to have Tom Hanks, who basically was, yo man, this guy's supposed to be like a symbologist prof who is like the upper echelon of academia, and the audience in general has this preconceived notion that this is dude's Forrest Gump. So I think that was one of the big issues that some of us had. Coming back to who could have been a better actor, I can't put my finger on who, but I don't know, there are a couple of guys Liam Neeson. If you lost the accent, that could have worked out. Like, he's older and he kicks ass, and that could have worked out much better.
I could see that. Plus, you would be able to. I guess I don't see Tom Hanks as an action movie guy. And
to be fair, it's a professor. It's not like this guy's like a Marine or something, right?
Right, I understand. But they're trying to sell this movie as an action movie. It's not. All right, so it's not J.J. Abrams or a Jason Statham movie, obviously. But there's still, there's car chases and shit. I don't know.
Well, I think that in general, the movie would have done perfectly well. At least the first movie would have done perfectly well, even if they didn't have a big name actor. I think that one of the reasons why this movie was made was because the book was very popular, but also I think that when you are reading the book, the general audience doesn't know every single thing about the art and artifacts or even the locations that they're talking about. I guess on one level, I'm fortunate that I teach architecture, so a lot of the architectural discussions about the spaces and churches and stuff, I was like, oh yeah, I can see that happening. And of course, there's some paintings that are ever so famous, whether it's the Vitruvian Man all the way through to the Last Supper. Those are kind of iconic things, and of course people can just look that up on the internet. But I think this movie needed to be made so that people could actually see the locales and really get that experience from reading the Dan Brown book. I think that it's no surprise that this movie got made, but it was hot off the trails of not only the book success, but you could go to Paris, London, or any other city that Robert Langdon goes through, and there are tours. I think even to this day, if you go to Paris, they have the Da Vinci Code tour that brings you to different parts of the Louvre or different parts of Paris to see those scenes that Langdon goes through. So I think the movie needed to be made so that the general audience could see all the stuff that was wrapped up in the books.
That's an interesting point, because in traditional Hollywood movies, all we see is California or New York City or something, or it's the traditional chick flick that happens in a generic place that you don't need to recognize, right? So this is, you're right. It's a real life kind of relatable experience.
It's real life and it's not real life. We can talk about the problems with speed and time and relativity there, because there are points in the book.
Oh, we lost Vince.
I don't know how much money that the Gandalf character could have had to basically get a plane to illegally smuggle Langdon out to the UK from France. There's so many question marks on how things like that could happen, but I think it's on one hand a novelization. Sorry, it's kind of taking great liberties with geography, and certainly just trying to tie up a intriguing story.
Yeah. So if I had to give this one a rating, my problem with giving a rating on this is that I'm tainted by the books, right? So I wouldn't be able to really rate the movie without also rating the book. So now it's been. I don't think I've ever reread the Da Vinci Code. I think I've only read it one time. Matter of fact, I don't think I've ever reread a Dan Brown novel. I mean, I'm a big rereader, Vince. I mean, I like to reread. I mean, all right. So there was so this is gonna sound stupid, but when I was I was in elementary school and middle school and high school. I mean, I was a very big reader, but I was also I wanted to impress people with my reading, so I always chose the biggest books, right? So I don't know if have you ever read a Tom Clancy book, Vince?
Yeah, but at the same time, Tom Clancy books are, I've never had a hard copy one. You buy them at the airport, they're like 2 inches thick, right? Paperbacks. You just blaze through them like on a couple of, return flights.
Yeah, but all right, so I always had the hardcovers, and they're huge. So they looked impressive. Even if, as I got older and my tastes became more complicated, I realized that Tom Clancy was a terrible writer. But it's the same thing. Like, I really liked Stephen King in middle school. I read all of his novels. And now that I've gotten older, I see a lot of Stephen King's flaws. And I've moved on. And I've completely lost.
You were talking about rereading.
Oh, so there's this book by Tom Clancy called Executive Orders. It's one of the Jack Ryan novels that they never made into a movie. Okay. And I had to have reread that book probably 30 times in my life. It's insane. I mean, I literally at one point I knew the entire book, but I'd reread it anyways. I would skip the parts that I didn't like, and just would read the dialogue. It was stupid. You got to remember, I was 15 years old. But I've never had that urge to reread any of the Dan Brown novels, and I've never really had the urge before now to rewatch the movies either. So I like to grade things based on my interest in rewatching them eventually, and past doing like something we did tonight where it was kind of like an assignment, I just have no interest in rewatching it. So I'd probably give the Da Vinci Code like a 2 out of 5. Not necessarily because it's an awful movie or even the acting is bad. I mean, I like the soundtrack was pretty good. Yep. I like the soundtrack of Angels and Demons better.
I would agree.
But there's this. I mean, it's not an excellent movie. It's not something I'd give like a 10 out of 10 if I was just grading it just on the movie, just in like a vacuum or whatever. But in terms of rewatchability, it kind of takes away from things. That's my biggest problem. Is I just have no interest in. And I'm a history buff. I watched National Treasure like I don't know 20 times in 2 weeks when I first discovered it. It was stupid. I mean, I literally just watched it over and over again. I don't even know why. It's not a fan. Say it again, Vince.
The Nicolas Cage just must rub off on you at some point, man. That's just not right.
Well, because there's not. I think the problem is there's not a lot of good movies out there that are based on historical novels and history, and obviously going into National Treasure and any history-based kind of movie, you're going to know that they're not going to stay true to actual history, which is something that Dan Brown actually tries to do a little bit. He gets the locations right, but he takes his story and weaves it into thing and uses like historical myths and legends and shit.
Well, that's the thing. That's what I was gonna get at though. Like, I mean, you're asking like, what would you give it? I'd say I give the movie as a retelling of the book, a decent grade. Like 5 out of 10 is fine for me. But coming to what you're talking about, the popularity. I think that old enough to remember this, but I do. The Dan Brown premise in Da Vinci Code of the lineage of Jesus Christ continuing on through Mary Magdalene and stuff like that. That I mean, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. You study history. Is the term, like, I don't know, it's called fake history or like crypto history, like basically alternate history. But whatever you might want to call it, it's like this esoteric, Gnostic approach to history, saying like I know better than pop. It's like those people that say, well, the Holocaust deniers will say the Holocaust didn't happen because we know the truth or something like that. That's the same kind of thing, that kind of like sense of enlightenment or false enlightenment that is available back when Da Vinci, prior to Da Vinci Code, about like 20 years earlier, the biggest book that was selling for guys like me was Holy Blood and Holy Grail or something like that. And that's admittedly what Dan Brown drew from, which, again, 20 years prior or 30 years prior to Dan Brown's book, this book proposed the same scenario, except instead of doing it in a narrative way, it just said straight up, here are the facts, and we suspect that at the end of the day, Jesus smuggled out and faked his death and continued his lineage, right? And what happens is that Dan Brown's book kind of rekindles that, and it's not a surprise that, in today's age where we have the internet, where everybody has various facts. I don't want to call them alternate facts because we're not a political podcast, but
Right.
the stuff posted online to say, did 9/11 happen? Jet fuel melts steel kind of thing. What happens is that you spur a whole bunch of media products like, Ancient Aliens or, those stupid haunting shows, right? Trying to kind of find ways to connect reality or history or some sort of like events in our past to like esoteric, whether it's aliens or magic or some other, other realm experiences or something like that. I think that's just what has now triggered a craving on the general population to kind of want.
Well, yeah, I think, see, especially with like the, one of my history professors in college called long ago history, big event, no known history, where there's just stuff that we don't, like, we don't know a lot about, the real Jesus, right? I mean, like, we know what the Bible says, but the Bible was written, started being written decades after he's apparently died, right? Yeah. So, I mean, so there's just so much, but there's a lot of things like that. I mean, prior to like the, like, we didn't even start really writing things down until like the 1500s. And a lot of the stuff that we wrote down prior to that was burned by the Catholic Church because it was, inappropriate or whatever. Or got burned in fires because they built, buildings out of wood. So, I mean, there's also the whole, I mean, in order for like a novel to sell or for movies to sell, I mean, we talk about this all the time, they have to make things, interesting, and they have to make things, they have to spruce things up, the Hollywoodization of history, if you will, I guess. I don't know. Kind of happens in movies like The Da Vinci Code and National Treasure, right? Because they got to make a, they have to have car chases and clues and, it's just kind of J.J. Abrams and the Transformers guy totally went blind.
Michael Bay.
Michael Bay. You got to have explosions in order to make anything good in Hollywood these days, right? So I mean, that's what they have to do. Real history is just not really like that. But then real history, a lot of times, is pretty boring.
Yeah,
there's a lot of downtime, right?
And that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, I think like the Dan Brown kind of stuff is just of a catalyst, because then I start thinking not only like the kind of crap that you see on History Channel, right? But again, like I'm thinking about movies like what was it? The one with Abraham Lincoln and vampires, or like what, Abe Lincoln Vampire Slayer or something like that?
Yeah, and then Daniel Day-Lewis did a Lincoln one, right?
Yeah, but that was a legit Lincoln biography. Like,
right, I know, but there's a whole bunch of them like that. There was one I got it. My mind is like been cut into tenths today. I can't remember shit. So go ahead, Vince. I'm just leave my ass behind. Say what you're saying.
But all I was trying to get at is that I think that in order for exciting or worth talking document.
You're breaking up real good. You're bad.
Can't just simply have a documentary citing like Richard III. So in that case, the only way you could make it celebrable or interesting would be to say Richard III practiced witchcraft and he had to kill his nephews to, raise the spirits of Satan or something, and maybe throw an Annabelle the doll in it to make it really creepy, right? Like that's the way things have to be now to make things enticing. And I think that's the kind of like superhero comic bookization of history that you start finding in media such as like the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so I think we'll move on. Vince, do you have a pick of the week for us this week?
No, man, I don't get anywhere. You know that.
And you need to get out more. Anyway, so just because you don't, I have two. Again, I'm just picking up the slack. All right, so if you have a lot of gadgets, like I know you do, Vince. You probably go through a lot of cables, and
Yes.
especially the iPhone cables are flimsier and shit, right? They break all the time.
Yep.
There's a company called Anchor. They do like braided cables, and they're like super strong, and they're fairly cheap too. So you can get like a multi-packs. I got a 10-foot lightning cable for $18.
Does the head fray off eventually? Because I bought those ghetto ones too, man. It's too good a deal.
Oh no, and this is actually like iPhone certified from Apple. It doesn't, I got it on Amazon, but like they, made for iPhone sticker. So I mean, it's legit. I mean, these things are all over, like recommended on YouTube and stuff. That's where I heard from some of the more popular YouTubers. So I know they last quite a while. Now, granted, I've only had mine for a week, so we'll see. But from the way it seems made, it seems very, very sturdy.
Okay.
At least way more sturdy than the stock Apple stuff. So I guess we'll see.
Well, I was just going to say one thing about the lightning connector is that I find that the actual thing that goes into the device, that actually snaps really easily.
Yeah, it's like really, really little. I mean, it's not. I don't think that like USB-C is going to be any different, really, in terms of rigidity or whatever, or long-term survivability. But for sure, I mean, you also got to remember that Apple charges $20 for this little 2-foot piece of plastic. So they don't want to go through and make things
affordable or practical or smart.
Right. They want you to have, throughout your lifetime of buying an iPhone, they want you to have to buy 3 or 4 of these things, so that you spend $60 or $70 on cables just for one phone. And then by the time you do that, then they'll change the connector again. So at least the Lightning connector's a little bit more sturdy than the 30-pin, which was terrible. It was.
I don't know, man. The 30-pin I didn't mind because it actually locked in and it was cool. Like,
yeah, the connector was fine, but because that end was so heavy, it I don't know, it kind of bore down on the wire that connected into it. I don't know. Mine just kind of kept fraying there at the edge. It was terrible. Anyway, so my second one, like any family, like my mom and dad and even I guess have tens of thousands of photos taken over the course of the last 120 years or something. I mean, it's insane how many photos we have in this house. But anyways, my mom finally decided to start a Facebook account for herself. Mm-hmm. And she wanted some family photos digitized. And we don't have a scanner anymore. I mean, like, this isn't the 1990s. So at first I just started taking pictures of the pictures with my iPhone, and that worked fine. But then I got on the App Store and found an app called the Google Photo Scan app. It's free.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it uses AR, right? So you take a picture of it centered, right? And then it projects 4 dots in the corners. And it takes 4 more photos based on those dots that it keeps in place while you move the camera around, and then it perfectly crops the photo and looks like you use like a professional scanner. It's amazing.
I wanted to know what the resolution was because I thought that was really cool. Like that, like when you take a photo of a photo, sometimes you get the hotspot glare and stuff. And I saw that online that it looked pretty legit. But I want to know the final resolution. Can you control that?
You can't. I don't know. I haven't really played around a lot with the like the settings or whatever, because I mean, I've just been kind of amazed at how well it did. For the photos I'm taking, I mean, some of these were taken like the 1800s and definitely in like the 50s and 60s. There's a lot of them, and those aren't really, these are Polaroid photos, right? So I mean, it doesn't. I haven't really been playing around with it, but like there's a glare removal and a flash, and I think that's like all the settings are. I mean, this is a very, very simple app. But once you take the photo, so like say if you've taken a photo and it messes up, which doesn't mess up very often. Almost all the time gets the corners perfect, but it actually saves all the data. So it's like a big gigantic panorama. So like if it misses the corners, you can go through and edit the corners and and perfectly align them if you have to after the fact, which is really neat. I don't see anything here about resolution.
Because I could see this really being useful for like, say for example, some of my students, they are too stupid or they make up excuses for not being able to scan drawings because we still scan. But like you can imagine like blueprints of a building, right? In a pinch, I could see using this app and just like taking a billion photos, and Google, this Google app stitches them all together and call it a day, right? Like I mean that might be worthwhile for the kids. You hear me, kids?
I'm not sure because I'm not sure how this would work with like bigger photos. So like the biggest I've taken is like an 8x10, and I had to like stand up and get away from it. So I'm not sure how it would work for bigger photos, and it doesn't really stitch them multiple photos together like that. Like it's actually like you're taking one photo, but it's taking the same photo 5 times. It's kind of like HDR, but it's so that it can crop out the edges. Anyways, there's a whole. Apparently, there's like 4 or 5 of these on the App Store, but this is free and from Google, so it's fairly trustworthy. Except for obviously they're gonna sell all your data, but I don't care. Take my data and give me free shit. Anyways, free, it's awesome. Anyways, that is it for us tonight. I don't know what we're doing next time. It's Ricky.
We'll get Ricky. It's okay. We'll get him.
Yeah. So if Ricky doesn't show up, we'll come up with something different. Anyways, if you want to follow us on Twitter, you can do so. The 3cast is at the 3cast with the number 3. I'm at MTWB. Ricky is Ricky_Williams1. Vince is VWHUI. He tweets very intellectual stuff. I tweet bullshit. It's basically what I tweet. You can also go to Facebook at facebook.com/3cast. Again, with the number 3. You can email us at email@the3cast, and you can spell that either way. The rest of them, I'm not running 2 Twitter accounts just to spell it both ways. It's just not going to happen. Not that ambitious and really don't care all that much. Anyways, we'll be back probably in 2 weeks, if not definitely 4. We'll see you then.
Take care, guys.
All right.